Good day and most welcome to 1595 of the Heidegger series, and we will today continue with Rethinking the Inner by Johnston. We've been discussing, so to speak, of misunderstanding of words, concepts, having in common that they refer to inwardness, but still being different. Last examples in the previous lecture, 1594, was about we may speak of a feeling long ago, and these words are an expression of feeling, but not I remember that I often met him. They are profoundly different. How then do sense impressions compare to remembering in this respect? Would it make sense for someone to say, now I know what it is like to see? At first glance, this seems perfectly in order. But what is it like to see? The difficulty here is that there seems to be nothing to describe apart from what one actually sees. The reason we find this confusing reason we find this confusing is because we want to treat seeing like a sensation, like in I am seeing now, a durative act, which is also a sensation. I am receiving the seeing, having a huge aspect of passivity to it. Yes, indeed. In fact, seeing is better compared to an ability than an experience. The key change in someone who could not see and now can is not that she has a new set of experiences, but that she can now do things she previously couldn't. Her experience may be said to have a new dimension, but what characterizes that dimension, and hence what constitutes its content, is not an account of sensations, but an account of what she can see. Against this, one might point to the exhilaration of a blind person who is suddenly able to see. But if there are experiences of joy and wonder here, these are certainly not a feature of our normal visual experience. These are things like being dazzled or being unable to focus. There may also be experiences which are only accessible to the sighted. for example, the feeling of isolation created by being surrounded on all sides by the sea, or the sense of power on looking down from a great height. Here, it would make sense to say, now I know what that experience is like, and its content can be described. Seeing itself, however, is not an experience in the sense that a sensation or a feeling is. There's no explaining what it is like, not because language is inadequate, but because it does not belong to that kind of category. That's very important. It doesn't belong to that category, and what we continuously tend to do is to mix the categories, unaware, and we've always done that. We are customary to that. What about emotions, though? What would we make of someone who said, now I know what it is like to fear? This seems to make better sense than someone saying she knows what it's like to remember, and yet it is not like the sensation case, for there is no particular experience the individual can point to which constitutes the fear. Very good. It doesn't have a transitive function, doesn't take an object. In fact, the key difference between us and someone who had never known fear would be that she did not share an aspect of our lives. Her ignorance of fear could not be compared with never having had a headache or not having experienced the pins and needle sensation. Rather, the fact that she had not known fear would mark her out as a different type of person. Not simply someone who had not had the same experiences as the rest of us. If she were to experience fear, the change would bring her closer to us and would be more akin to a change in her attitude or approach to things rather than simply the acquisition of a new experience. To illustrate this, consider a more unusual emotion, and one which it is quite conceivable that not everyone should have had, namely despair. Her people often say that it is impossible to know what this experience is like unless one has experienced it. But it is not like having a particularly unusual sensation. What matters is not just how the individual describes her experience, but also how she later acts. E.g., her later attitude and relation to others. If despair changes her, this is not because the experience just happens to have certain consequences. Rather, part of the measure of what she experienced is the degree and way in which it affects her subsequent behavior. The expression of her new experience is that she understands differently, sees things in a new light. What before seemed foolish or reprehensible may now seem comprehensible. Where she once felt contempt, she may now feel sympathy. And what she once took for granted may now be a source of delight. Returning to the concepts of the intellect, we can see that understanding is similar to remembering. For it would make no sense to say, now I know what it is like to understand. As this suggests, and it's interesting here, we do understand, that remembering and experiences and perceptions are widely different from these things like remembering and understanding. As this suggests, understanding is neither an experience nor a feeling. How true. Although it may involve these. Unlike an emotion, it does not have a characteristic expression in behavior, but is akin to an ability. Someone who comes to understand something learns to do something new, and this does not necessarily involve having an experience or an image, although it may do so. For example, when the individual suddenly understands how to continue a sequence, she may see a formula in her head, but even here, the image does not constitute her understanding. The understanding lies in the application of the image. And if someone can continue the sequence but has no image, she will still be said to understand. There are certainly experiences which can be associated with understanding. The joyful feeling of now I can go on, and even certain bodily sensations. A loosening in the chest maybe, or the feeling of lightness in the head. However, these do not constitute understanding. Nor should understanding be thought of as a further specific but non-describable mental process. As we saw in chapter 3, if a soldier turns left on being ordered to turn right, her understanding of the command is not separable from the order, from her action. Very good. The action and the understanding are the same thing, essentially. Could not be separable. They stem from likewise origin, so to speak. Listen now. The action itself justifies us in saying she understood the order wrongly, and that is the thing. the notion of a further undescribable process explains nothing. An ostension is pointing to the inside wouldn't help anything. It would dim out, make blur what is absolutely clear in its use. That is misuse. That is misunderstanding. By trying to explain that, that's exactly where the fundamental mistakes start. Although it may take some time to understand something, there's no specific mental process which must occur before we can talk of understanding. Understanding doesn't have a relation to an inner process. And how grand would that be if neurology, the sciences of cognition, psychology, psychiatry would have understood this much earlier. Furthermore, like thought in general, understanding does not have duration in the way a process would, and sense impressions and sensations do. Someone may understand gradually or in a flash, but even in the former case, it would be impossible to plot the growth of understanding on a second-by-second basis. A further key grammatical point about understanding is that, unlike a sense impression or sensation, it is not interrupted by a break in consciousness. This point also holds for other concepts of the intellect, such as believing, knowing, and intending. Provisionally and slightly misleading, Wittgenstein calls these concepts dispositions, and he notes that an important difference between dispositions and states of consciousness consists in the fact that the disposition is not interrupted by a break in consciousness or a shift in attention. Really, one hardly ever says that one has believed or understood something uninterruptedly since yesterday. An interruption of belief would be a period
Sorry.
Really, one hardly ever says that one has believed or understood something uninterruptedly since yesterday. I am the one who should be sorry. An interruption of belief will be a period of unbelief, not, e.g., the withdrawal of attention from what one believes, or, e.g., sleep. For these reasons, it would make no sense for someone to try to monitor such dispositions continuously.
This checking is still going on, sorry about that.
Isn't that interesting? You can never say that somebody can try to monitor such dispositions continuously. That I continuously believe that the sun will rise tomorrow. And these mistakes are so common. We take them for granted. We treat them all as one thing or maybe two things. But that blur that enormously important distinction that does make all the change. All the valid circumstances do pertain to that. Everything changes. These are the famous Wittgensteinian grammatical points. And you see now the grammar of Wittgenstein is quite different from the Johnston take, or grammar as you might stumble upon it in linguistics or study of Old Greek or what have you. It would also be ridiculous to say that I have an intention for 1 hour or something of the similar. This is also very close that we discussed earlier of François Jacob, where he makes life a noun somehow. That is a mistaken ideas of grammar of language. Not a big floppy mistake, you cannot say, but it still is most definitely a mistake. And it leads to the philosophical problems and a strain, I would say, in our thinking, in our understanding of the world. It takes a lot of energy. It is like we don't understand the instrument that we are using. My favorite metaphor is that I can handle the manual shift in a car, but I could never explain what I'm doing, but it fails to cover all these nuances and complexities that sort of is underneath perception, feeling, disposition, if you like, understanding, knowing, remembering, intending. Understanding especially is very cumbersome, and how they get clumped together and combine with inner outer division in a very crude way, not elegant, complex, fractal, I would say. Also. Something that helped a lot in the understanding of this is the discoveries by Barbara Tversky. How we learned to decontextualize and recontextualize by doing drawings in stone caves once upon a time. That decontextualization and recontextualization. For instance, having a herd of bisons, hunters trying to kill them, and then isolate the hunters and making them a thing by themselves, decontextualizing them from the big now one can imagine the Stone Age people were living in, and putting them somewhere else. This is a sort of simple understanding that is an act. At bottom, we have activity, and the marching soldier shows that he understood or not understood by his acts. That is the greatness of Wittgenstein. I say thank you very much. Thank you for today. Sorry about the fall of the video camera. Have a very pleasant night, almost, I would say.